Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm gonna be walking around the neighborhood for this video. So this part of this series around the cognitive functions and how that impacts your relationships, I thought deserved 2 episodes. Because there's a lot there. We could probably make many more than even that. Let me get this angle right. There we go. So yeah, I kind of just rambled a bit in the last one. There's so many pieces that go into this discussion about compatibility. And as I always say, it's not a perfect science. It's very subjective to each individual. But here's what I want to talk about today. I want to get into the more specific impact that the function has on your compatibility and your interaction with a partner. So let's talk about what a function is. So what Carl Jung started seeing in his patients was a preference for thinking or feeling and a preference for intuition or sensory. And over time, what he realized is that these preferences came with an introverted or an extroverted charge, and whatever someone had created a polarity, which we've talked about already in this series. So if you have introverted thinking, you've got extroverted feeling, and vice versa. If you have extroverted thinking, you have introverted feeling. Same with the observer functions, the sensory and the intuition. So why does this matter for relationships? Well, it's a big deal. And the reason is because whatever your introverted charge is, you are going to be doing alone. And your nervous system is going to calm and settle itself by processing that letter alone. So if you're introverted intuition, you're going to be processing patterns and abstract realities in your inner world. And if you're extroverted intuition, you're going to be wanting to talk it out or process it with others because it has an extroverted charge. If you're introverted feeling, your values and emotions are going to be very personal. They're going to be deep and inward and narrowed and specific. If they are extroverted, you're going to be wanting to talk them out. You're going to be processing them with others. They're going to be incomplete by yourself. You're going to want to use the tribe to resolve them. Okay, so your extroverted functions are the roadmap for what your nervous system assumes you're doing together with someone else. And your introverted functions are the roadmap for what your nervous system assumes you're doing by yourself. So it's important to keep in mind that that's going to impact who you're in a relationship with. Because let's just assume a couple where both partners are completely opposite functions. Now, there may be an initial magnetism towards someone who has different functions because initially when you're in limerence, it's very interesting. But what you're likely going to run into later is a lot of misunderstandings. Because both people are assuming what should be done together is different. So that's the point of this video, is what do you do together? This has a huge impact on your relationship. So in my personal experience, I think you're going to have the easiest time if you share all the functions. Now, again, none of this is required. Our personality type is a starting point. It's not everything in a relationship by any means, but it does tell us how compatible we'll be from the get-go and how much work we're going to have to do on certain areas. So when it comes to intimacy and romantic relationships and human connection, the decider axis seems to have more to do with romance and intimacy, and even, I think, emotional communication. So the problem is, if your partner has a different decider axis, you're both constantly assuming that what should be done extrovertedly with the tribe is opposite of the other person. So if I assume that feelings should be worked out together, you assume that feelings should be worked out alone. Or if I assume that values are something that are collective and you assume that values are something subjective, that's going to cause some collision, especially if we don't know what's going on. What's going to happen is I'm going to start to think you're a bad person. This happens all the time in relationships because people just talk past one another. And so the way I think we should think about functions in romantic compatibility is basically just a roadmap and a starting point for how good our communication is going to be. If you share the same decider functions, your emotional communication is going to have a huge head start. You're not going to trigger one another when you're trying to process emotional things. Because what I've noticed and what has happened in my experience is I have a little feminine baby FE at the bottom. I'm an ISTP, so I have masculine TI at the top, and a little pushover feminine FE baby at the bottom. And so when it comes time to process my feelings, and I try to do it with the tribe, if my partner leaves me to go process theirs alone, my little inner child feels abandoned. It doesn't feel good. And so I've realized over time, at least for me, that I've got to have a partner that can meet me with gentleness on that journey and talk feelings out with me. And that's just something that's important to me. You've got to decide what your non-negotiables are. This is relationships. This is subjective. You get to decide what your values are in a relationship. But for me, I want emotional harmony. And my journey in my life has really been directed towards all right, I got to turn this off. I'll be right back. All right. So the introverted functions are personal and the extroverted functions are impersonal. So if you're trying to do something personal and your partner doesn't feel that that thing is that personal, it might cause a rub. It might cause some misunderstandings. So that's really what the functions determine. I'm not putting up this video to tell you what your perfect match is on functions. I personally think you're going to have the easiest time if you share same functions. So if you're with someone, for you socionics folks, if you find someone who is in the same quadra, it's going to be very easy for you to communicate. So you've got a good starting point. However, You might meet someone who you're very compatible with who has maybe one different axis, maybe both different axes. But just keep in mind, you're going to have to do a lot more work emotionally, and it will be very hard for your system to understand someone of the complete opposite axes. So whatever your introverted functions are personal, and you assume they should be done alone. Whatever your extroverted functions are impersonal, and you assume that those things should be done together. So that's the point of this video. What do you do together? Sharing things, if sharing things with a partner is important to you, especially processing values or working together, then sharing the decider function is going to be important, right? On the observer axis, your SIs are going to be very personal with things. They're going to be narrowing down the sensory. They're going to be attached to physical things. They are going to want to know what to expect and not like surprises, right? They want to plan out the sensory, whereas the extroverted sensors are wanting, or I should say, preferring to keep their options open. They're not wanting to narrow down. And then the introverted intuitives, they are processing patterns alone, figuring out patterns alone, abstract alone. And the extroverted intuitives are processing the abstract together extrovertedly, right? So all these different dynamics really play into the math of how you interact with the partner. So that's the question. What do you do together? I think it's a good way to think about this. You've got to have some commonality with your partner. And for me, I think the decider functions have to be the same. I have exhausted trying the opposite decider axes with some great people. And emotionally, we just weren't able to see one another. And I notice over time that with the different decider axes, and especially if that introverted function is masculine on the opposite letter, it just wears you down. You can't stay close to a person. So what do you do together? Your extroverted functions will tell you. All right, I'll see you guys next time.